Hey guys, this is Solution PODFIC, and today we're going to be reading The Heir to Stark Industries by Only Forward. This is Chapter 3. In the morning, Peter wanted to die. It was too early, and okay. Maybe that was his fault for staying up and fighting a crime family into the early hours of the morning. But 6 a.m. was just too early for anyone to possibly get up. None of the employees were at the tower yet, so he sent a couple of quick emails fixing loose ends he had forgotten about, from his role as intern director rather than CEO, not expecting any responses for a good several hours. He also sent Ava a note asking her to write him another letter to excuse him from attending school again, addressed to the principal of Midtown. He winced. He hated getting other people to do stuff for him, and also his principal would probably kick up a fuss for it. Principal Moretti had never believed him about the Stark internship, even when Peter had turned up to his office with the full paperwork showing he was a proper intern, which he hadn't been, but he'd needed to say something, and saying Tony Stark's personal intern probably wasn't going to improve his credibility. Principal Moretti had this big thing about only parents or guardians being able to sign off on an absence. Well, hell, he hadn't seen May since the day before, and Mr. Stark was out of action. Peter didn't want to bother with him something so trivial as signing his slip when he was as ill as he was. It seemed stupid. Hopefully, Principal Moretti would forget about it and accept the letter from Ava, extenuating circumstances and all. He and Friday had concluded that most employees arrived at the tower at 8 to 9 a.m., so he was pretty much free from 6 to 8. That gave him 2 hours of free time, in which he had a plan. Peter was going to work on the comfort room, and get it as ready as he possibly could. Friday scanned the tower for him and found a room that was not being used, was fairly large, and had an adjacent empty office. That was his plan for the comfort room. Construction work and then making it look cool. Now Peter didn't know much about restoration, but he was fairly strong and had the blueprints to the building. There were no steel beams that would collapse if he just broke through the wall. It wasn't the best of plans, but hey, he had to start somewhere, and this comfort room was his project. After he knocked through the wall from the room to the office, thanks to his super strength, and had Friday order a door to replace the hole that he'd just knocked into the wall, he cleaned it up. It wasn't actually that bad for a guy who'd never done any restoration work in his life. It looked kinda smart, and the door would definitely fit without having to do much extra work. Slap a door frame on it and it would be good as new. Then he got the cool paints that Friday had found in some storage cupboard somewhere and got to work on painting the room, which was previously just white walls. Boring. Peter had to climb on the ceiling to reach some of the high bits, but hey, no one was at work yet. There was no one who could possibly see him climbing on the ceiling. After he'd done the first wall, it turned out he quite enjoyed painting, which boded well for the other 3 walls, as well as the ones he'd inevitably have to paint for the therapist's office. Once the room was painted a subtle, calming light blue color, it was about 7:30, and Pete was beginning to see it all coming together. He sat down with a thump on one of the ugly armchairs Friday had found in some other storage closet, placeholders until the sofa he'd ordered last night arrived, thinking about decorating. Peter had a rough idea for what he wanted this room to be like. He just thought about what he'd want in a chill room and essentially just pressed buy. Half the stuff wouldn't arrive until next week, given the short notice, including most of the furniture. But a lot of the stuff he'd pay for express delivery to get it delivered for the day, hence the sofa's on the way. And in the meantime, well, he'd ordered a couple of things for his office a couple of days ago that he decided he could actually just put in the comfort room. A lava lamp, several cushions, and some blankets. By the end of it, he thought he'd done a pretty good job. The room was painted, there was a hole into the office for the new therapist, and he had plans in place for decorations. Friday would tell him when any of the new stuff would be delivered. Of course, there was no point in the comfort room if it didn't come with the attached help he had suggested to Mary, which is why his call to Sam from last night had been crucial to making today work. Sam, as in the Falcon, one of the Avengers, was a licensed therapist, and Peter figured he'd probably have contacts to a therapist. Some of them were probably looking for a job, right? Once he had explained his idea, going into depth about his conversation with Mary, and explained that he thought it would be a good idea for Stark Industries to at least have access to help for their mental health, as the American healthcare system was bullshit, it turned out Sam agreed with him, and thought it was a superb idea. They'd had what was quite a nice conversation about his occasional job as acting CEO, which apparently Sam hadn't known about. Sam said he wished he could also sometimes be the CEO of a billion-dollar company. Peter told him that he could probably just ask Tony if Sam wanted to try it out for a day, and Sam had chuckled. But the main resolution was that Sam agreed to help Peter out. Peter had been right, that some of the therapists would be looking for jobs. Sam had made a few calls for him, and chosen a friend of his who thought would fit right for their situation, Emily. Sam said that she was patient, friendly, and remained calm. Emily had been keen on the role as well. So Peter took her number. Peter had given her a ring and told her to come in for a trial run. Peter made a mental note to send an email around inviting people to book up sessions with their new free private therapist called Emily, and also to send Sam a present as a thank you. Peter probably wasn't supposed to just hire people, so he sent a quick email from his phone down to someone in HR to explain the situation. HR would probably sort Emily out with everything new employees got. A contract, an NDA, possibly? Peter didn't know much about how it worked. He'd never had to sign any contracts or pieces of paper saying he worked at Stark Industries, except maybe the slightly mistruthful declaration that he was an intern, which in fairness was official Stark paperwork that normal employees used. But even when he'd started, when Tony hardly knew Peter, other than he was Spider-Man and pretty good with science and technology, Tony never made him sign an NDA, even when Peter had seen all sorts of confidential files and unreleased products. Even when he'd gotten to test drive in one of the Iron Man suits just to see what it was like. Peter had almost thrown up, but it was exhilarating. By the time he'd done all that he could do with the comfort room, it was 8 o'clock, and time to get to work. Well, different work. Next on the schedule was his meeting with the legal team, which he scheduled for 9 o'clock on the dot. True, it was probably unfair to kick off the day with a meeting for the whole team. They probably had a previous plan, other meetings, but Friday had pushed them back in order to have the meeting, as it was just too important to consider giving the employees some pre-warning. He had issues to sort, and the meeting was sort of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. First off, it meant he wouldn't have to go to the legal department and ask them how they were doing, just like he'd been doing for the rest of the departments. Hopefully none of the legal team would want to pull a gun on him, even after he talked to them for an hour. Peter could just ask each of them whilst they were sat at the table whether they had grievances with Stark Industries. And second, of course, he needed to talk about an action against the daily media and the whole debacle from the day previously. There were several options for persecuting the newspaper, and Marcus specifically, from the daily media. Not to be confused with Marcus, Mark from marketing. Peter had worn a pajama shirt and sweatpants to the early morning meeting. Aware that painting was messy, but that wouldn't really fit a serious meeting with the legal team, so he retreated to Tony's penthouse to have a shower and put on one of his suits, which were actually growing on him. The one he was wearing was a deep navy, worn with a crisp white shirt. And even better, his name badge was actually attached to it, so Happy wouldn't get mad at him. Time was tight, but he arrived at the meeting before the legal team got there and sat down waiting. During the dull moments of being Spider-Man last night, when he was sat on the roofs of the buildings waiting for the slightest movement to trigger his Peter tingle, he'd read up on the legal documents and language, ready for the meeting. He still had no idea what he was doing, but hopefully he wouldn't be as lost. "Mr. Parker, it's a pleasure." The head of the legal team, a guy named Andrew McGuire, nodded at him. Followed by his team, they all had a sort of dazed look of surprise on their faces. It was clear that they had all just read the email he had sent fairly late last night, requesting the meeting at 9. Apologies for the early request. It was an emergency. We're just waiting on Miss Roberts from PR and Kai from HR, who I requested to appear in this meeting, as well as due to the relevance with the situation. Their offices are, of course, a little further than yours. That brought out a general chuckle from the room, and so Peter seized the chance, getting the first bird out of the way, so to speak. As we're waiting, I'm sure the news has circulated that I've been doing a tour of the building whilst I'm in this position. I was getting introduced to some of the employees and asked about their problems with Stark Industries. I haven't gotten around to you guys yet, and here you all are. So, hello, if we haven't met, my name is Peter Parker, intern director and acting CEO of Stark Industries. Bizarrely, this led to a circle of introductions from the table. It was nice to be introduced to the team, although Peter had never been the best at remembering names. My main aim for this tour, so to speak, was to talk to everyone about their roles here, and whether they have any problems, suggestions for improvement, that sort of thing. I'm in a room full of lawyers right now. We pay you to fix our problems, I know that. But it's more of a personal type thing. Just yesterday I made a commitment to one of the employees to bring in a private therapist, free of charge, for all the employees to have access to. Nothing is off limits. Peter thought about that for a second. Well, some things might be. I'm not sure if Mr. Stark would want me to let you all have free reign of the Iron Man seats, but most things I can probably grant you. So, go. I want to hear it. Some of the lawyers sat in their seats, shifting uncomfortably, clearly uncomfortable as shit-talking their workplace to their boss. Peter got it, really. It made sense. But finally, after 30 seconds of awkward deliberation, someone put their hand up. This is really, really trivial, but I was wondering whether it would be possible to install a water fountain up on our floor. We have to go to the lift down to the canteen to get some water, and it's kind of a pain. Done. Peter slapped his hand on the table. Come on, guys. We're going to be here for a while. Let's get to it. Who wants what? After that, several more hands went up, asking for extremely specific things that only filthy rich lawyers could possibly want in their offices. Peter had agreed to buy them a coffee machine and even signed a couple of them up for the trial sessions with Emily, which delighted him. Someone even had a suggestion for him to get some fish in the comfort room, which made Peter actually gape in awe. Peter loved looking at fish in the little aquarium fish bowls. One of his favorite outings with May had been a couple years ago when he'd gone to SeaWorld and had gone through the tunnel where they have all kinds of big fish and even turtles in the artificial pool. Okay, so they couldn't have turtles in the comfort room, but they could have fish. He was just itching to get onto some websites and start ordering stuff for the little fish friends. He was right in the middle of hearing a guy called Mr. McIntyre explain his suggestion for a collective Stark party for Tony's birthday, which Peter privately knew Tony would hate, but hell, he had asked for suggestions. When he heard movement from the outside of the room, Peter's head turned to the door. He could hear the footsteps of Kai and Mr. Roberts, not that the other occupants of the room would be able to. Hold that thought, Mr. McIntyre. I do believe our other arrivals are here. Apologies all, Mrs. Roberts said. The lifts are pretty crowded right now. Everybody was getting off at every floor. Peter smacked his head. He really should have remembered that. 9 a.m., everyone was just beginning to arrive to try and get to their offices, and he'd stuck Miss Roberts and Kai in all that mess. At least they'd found each other and arrived at the same time. Ah, shoot, Peter apologized. Sorry, I should have gotten Friday to fast-track you here. That's my bad. Anyways, come and sit down. And from there, Peter turned from his light demeanor saying yes to water fountains and coffee machines to his more serious one. The meeting took a darker turn. The legal team made him write a testimony word for word about what happened in the office with Jamie, Alex, whose whole name was apparently Alexandra Rivers. They gave him the details on her as well as a previous offense of defamation of character against a celebrity. The legal team believed she'd gone through a damaging childhood experience with someone similar to Tony and felt the need to ruin Tony's life as a result. But that was just their guess. Mrs. Roberts and Kai gave their experience with Alex. The lawyers advised settling the issues with Alex pulling a gun on Peter through the justice system, as that was a criminal offense. But the attempted defamation of character would be a civil lawsuit that they would work on drawing up. It would be the legal team's main priority for the day, Peter decided. Anything else could wait. It was less important, as long as those articles that Marcus planned to publish for the daily media did not get released, Tony's reputation wouldn't get hit. Peter's identity would remain a secret, and Tony wouldn't be accused of being a shit dad, despite not even being a dad. Well, not really being a dad. He was listed as Peter's official guardian, just in case his Parker luck returned, and May was the result of it. May's suggestion, not his. May had asked the billionaire at the embarrassment of Peter, and Tony had been shocked but delighted. So technically Tony wasn't a dad, but he was a father figure. Peter would totally call Tony dad if he thought Tony would be okay with it, though. He wanted the civil lawsuit arranged and sorted before he passed the reins back to Pepper tomorrow. So Peter got Friday to suspend all meetings the legal team had, and got them cracking with the lawsuit, dismissing Miss Roberts and Kai to get back to their departments. Peter, too, didn't have much to add to the conversation. James Blake guessed they'd probably be done with at least the rough draft in a couple of hours, so Peter made plans to return. After all, he had another extremely important phone call lined up, to check he hadn't messed up the whole lawsuit business. And then, because there wasn't much he could do, it was back to his tour. There were 2 places he hadn't been, R&D, his baby, his favorite of all the departments, and assembling production. But before he toured his actual building, he had a couple of calls to make. It was 11 a.m. God, the meeting with the legal team had been 2 hours? Which meant in British time it was 1600, and whoa. Okay, midnight in Hong Kong. Maybe a call to Hong Kong was a little ambitious, but a late afternoon call to the London department had to fit into his tour of Stark Industries. Otherwise, he was simply neglecting the other departments, and Pepper wasn't exactly running them as she was still busy reconstructing Tokyo. Of course, Pepper was hardly ever in London, so the branch was mostly directed under a lovely English lady called Isabella Taylor-Jones. Pepper did frequent video calls with her, and was still technically in charge of all the senior decisions, but she mainly trusted Isabella to get on with it. Peter assumed Isabella had been informed about the Young Boss protocol, as one of the most senior members of the Stark team. And apparently, as she answered his video call with a surprised look, he was right. You must be Peter Parker. She smiled with the quintessentially posh English accent. I've heard an awful lot about you from Pepper, of course. I'm Elizabeth Taylor-Jones, leading the London branch, but of course you know that. Yes, Peter found himself smiling back. She was easy to like. He could tell why Pepper left her to do the work. I wanted to chat to you, just to get in contact. I didn't want you feeling abandoned all the way over in London. Well, it is very kind of you, Mr. Parker. Did you have any specific questions? I'm touring the New York branch department by department, Peter explained, as he had been explaining to people for the last couple of days. Of course, I can't do that for the London branch because I'm in New York, so the best thing I thought was just to contact you directly and check how everything is. That's all. I'm just checking in. Any concerns? Issues? I have no problems, Mr. Parker, other than that I miss Pepper. She hasn't been to London on a work trip for over a year, and I miss her. Isabella glanced across the room. Pepper could see across the screen. When she's back in the office, you should tell her to take a break and come and visit me. I will definitely do that. So all is good across the Atlantic then? Peter wanted to leave her alone, let her get on with everything she clearly needed to do. It was probably an inconvenient time to call, right at the end of the working day, and completely out of the blue, but she had taken it well. All is operation as normal, Mr. Parker. I keep a tight ship. Isabella smiled again, less distracted than as she had been a few seconds ago. As does Pepper. I can see why she chose you of all those capable. Peter grinned back. And I can see why the gracious couple chose you, young boss. I can see your face in the magazines already, the legacy passed on. Isabella sounded sincere, and Peter's face went red with embarrassment. Oh, no, this is just a temporary thing. I'm not actually going to be the CEO. He could see how that could be a misconception, but Tony had promised it was an emergencies only. It made Peter kind of sad, really. He'd grown to quite enjoy his little sessions as CEO. He'd be quite sad to pass it all back to Pepper. Well, I'd pick you as the replacement. If Pepper ever steps down, you're a nice kid, clearly a powerhouse, good at running things, and even checking up on people not in the same country as you, and not doing it at some bizarre time of night. You're a smart cookie, and a lot like Tony. Peter was pretty used to the comparisons. A lot of the higher-up Stark employees had said much of the same thing, but it still took him by surprise whenever someone said it outright. He always felt extremely proud to be compared to Tony. But hey, I'm not sure Pepper will actually retire, you know. That woman is a force of nature, and she likes working far too much. That's why she and Tony work so well together. Both of them are high-functioning. Peter agreed. Their relationship was goals, and honestly, he could see a bit of Pepper's ferocity in MJ, too. Maybe he was a little like Tony. Yeah, Peter chuckled. Well, it was lovely talking to you, Isabella. Hope you have a great evening. Gosh, Peter kind of wished it could be evening already for him. But that was only in the UK. He'd already redecorated a whole room and drawn up a lawsuit. That was more than most high school seniors would have to do in one day. And he still had more to do. Speak to you later, Peter, Isabella said cheerily and hung up the phone. Peter fought the urge to go straight to R&D, his comfort zone, and instead headed for assembly and production. The tour continued. AMP was a weird branch of Stark Industries. It was smaller than the rest of the teams because, of course, a lot of the assembly and production wasn't actually done in Stark Tower. They had a few products that were streamlined solely through Stark Tower due to specific technology needed. It was expensive to build 3D printers in multiple factories across the country, but a lot of the products, such as Stark phones, and generally any of the main products, due to be sold to the consumers on a larger scale, were outsourced to other factories off-site. Most of them were states away, some even based in other countries. Many of the AMP team on Stark Tower headquarters were liaisons for the other faculties, keeping everything updated and running all the info off to marketing and PR. So Peter went and he learned about the roles of each of the employees, who was in charge of what and where. There was no problems or concerns to report, so it mostly consisted of just chatting to the employees about their jobs. He even got to chat to the owner of a factory off-site, who happened to be calling. The factory owner had straightened up when he'd introduced himself, at first looking slightly critical and confused as to why he was talking to a 17-year-old boy. There hadn't been very much of that this time around. The general concern that it was a teenager running a company and the disbelief. Peter supposed it was because, after last time, there had been an increased awareness of what the Young Boss protocol actually entailed. The Stark employees knew of him, even if they hadn't met him, and it probably helped that Peter had only interacted with the Stark employees rather than external organizations. That was the great thing about having no meetings with clients. Pete had lunch with Happy in the canteen. He'd actually remembered to have lunch this time, and then ran up to the lifts, getting Friday to track him back up to the office he'd left the legal team in. They'd been there for hours, and Peter wanted to see what they'd been able to do with that time. When he'd returned to the legal department, they'd made significant progress. The lawsuit, miraculously, was basically done. Happy had once told him that lawsuits took forever, weeks even, when he was mid-complaint about something happening at Stark Industries. That had been before Peter was even intern director, but it took weeks when lawyers had other things to do and sort. Peter had got a whole room of extremely intelligent, on-the-ball lawyers, fully concentrated on one thing, and there had been clear results. He scanned over the document, trying to piece together what half of it meant. Even having read up on legal language, a lot of it was lost on him. Peter excused himself to make the phone call he'd been dreading all day. Picking up the phone, he pressed down the contact he was looking for and then took a deep breath. It was, after all, a weird favor to ask a guy he hardly knew, but nevertheless, he picked up on the first ring. "Excuse me, Mr. Murdoch?" Peter bit his lip. Matt might not have even saved his number. Speaking. Peter had first met Matt Murdoch in a cafe in New York. Peter had noticed there was something different about Mr. Murdoch, and presumably Matt had the same sense about Peter. There was just something a little off about the other. It was the same reason Peter was somewhat uncomfortable when he was in the room with Captain America. It set off alarm bells for his spidey sense, even though he knew for a fact the captain was no threat to him. "Hey, it's, Peter scratched the back of his neck. Is Peter Parker, the guy you met in the cafe? Mr. Murdoch hadn't asked about his super senses, but Peter was pretty sure he could hazard a guess. And Mr. Murdoch had known that he worked at Stark Industries because Peter had been in and out to work and was wearing his intern director badge. So the cat had been out of the bag by that point. Of course, Peter, hi. Matt's tone turned significantly more friendly. Do you need something? You're a lawyer, right? Peter wanted to make sure that Mr. Murdoch hadn't suddenly decided to change career paths before he asked his question. That I am. Mr. Murdoch had been calm in the cafe, and he was calm over the phone. Peter thought he could voice podcast well, but hey, that wasn't relevant. Is it possible that you could read over the contract I've just had my legal team read up? Oh, right, I should say. I'm acting as CEO for the day because Mrs. Potts and Mr. Stark are both out of action. I don't actually have a team of lawyers at my beck and call. But there was this incident. Peter went on to explain the whole debacle with the Daily Media and potential defamation of character and the solution he and the lawyers had worked out. I don't want to run it by Mr. Stark because it would just stress him out, and I'm pretty sure Pepper is on a plane right now, so you are the person I thought of. Sorry if that's weird. Of course I'll read it over, although I'm not sure there's anything I can add that your team of lawyers haven't already thought of. I'll check that they aren't fucking with you, though, as you've already had a problem with corrupt employees. That would be great. Thanks, Mr. Murdoch. You are a really great lawyer. I'd love for you to check it over. Peter relaxed. Okay, it wasn't as bad as he thought it had been. Mr. Murdoch had been pretty understanding, calm, and kind. No problem, Peter. Send the file over to me, and please, do call me Matt. With that, the conversation was over, and Peter got to work sending the rough draft over to Mr. Matt, and then he left his legal team to it. He did trust them, of course. He just wanted a second opinion. There was another ticking time bomb about the whole situation. He knew he'd have to speak to Tony at some point. It would all trickle down the grapevine. The only way Peter knew the situation with Jamie hadn't been brought to Tony's attention was because if Tony had found out, his phone would have been spammed with calls. Hell, Tony would probably have broken out of the hospital to come and reprimand him. But he hadn't, and that was the way Peter wanted to keep it. But hell, it was best not to think about the overprotective father figure mode that Tony would go into when he found out that Peter had nearly been killed on one of his only days as CEO. Tony would probably shut down the whole young boss protocol, and there was no way Peter wanted that. After he spent an hour or two running some quick errands, sending various emails to clients, and arranging Pepper's meetings for the next couple of days, it was about 3 o'clock, but hey, he only had one place left on his tour, and it was his favorite place in the whole world. Peter was in charge of research and development, pretty much. R&D was basically run by interns, all doing their little projects. And they were ran by intern heads, and Peter ran the intern heads as intern director, on any normal day, so technically he didn't have to consult them during the Young Boss protocol, but it only felt right. He figured out that the equation that had been bothering him from the back of his physics test, some complex thing about the household bot they were producing that one of the marketing department had requested he had put a name on. Together with Isaac, he got the robot team all assembled, and they discussed their advancements for the day. They had made no further progress with the equation they'd been stuck on, but had made some small adjustments and changes in the robot's coding to make it more fluid in its movements. When Peter had had a spare couple of minutes during his lunch with Happy, he had started doodling the equation they'd been struggling with on a napkin, and he had accidentally solved it. So he and Isaac's team spent an hour coding that into the bot, and it fixed the problem they'd had with it, which would probably advance their time schedule for about a week. He was delighted to tell the employee for marketing their achievement. He left them, then, to discuss potential names, and Peter had been right. Isaac was delighted with the opportunity to name his robot, his creation. Then he essentially went back to his normal role at Stark Industries, dancing around the labs and tinkering with people's projects. Chatting at all of the interns, Peter knew them all by name, of course, and had made it fairly clear ever since his assignment that he wouldn't be overbearing, but extremely willing to help at all times, and also wanted the best for the interns. Peter had already had several things changed on the interns' floors. Lisa had suggested an explosion-proof room, as so many of their projects were dangerous and kept causing a lot of damage to the lab when they were being tested. Anything they wanted had pretty much been granted, except when the interns had collectively asked to buy pure gold just for the purpose of melting it down and making Peter a crown. Apparently he was a king and needed to be recognized for it. After he had done his rounds with the coolest bunch of science nerds ever, which, naturally, took him into the early evening, Friday informed him that a lot of stuff was waiting for him just outside the comfort room. The sofas he'd ordered, for one, and some other bits to make it look perfect. He sped there to do a bit of sorting, satisfied when it was complete. And then, well, he decided that an early patrol would finish the day off nicely. Peter liked to sit on the roofs of the tall buildings, which was often where he found himself when he was out as Spider-Man with nothing to do, waiting for something to trigger his senses. It meant he could watch the sunset and do some errands without anyone bothering him. Speaking of doing errands, hey Pepper, I know you're on a plane right now, but I just wanted to leave you the voicemail to say that I've done quite a lot in the last few days, and yeah, Just that I'll explain some of the stuff when you get back to the States. Take care. Peter knew he needed to go into depth of his changes. It was Pepper's company, after all. It wasn't fair that she'd return without knowing all of the things he'd done in the last 2 days. He was just glad that he'd made some of the changes mostly complete. The comfort room was basically done, with the sofas fitted, and he'd even gotten a construction guy to help him fit the door. They had been just before he came out of Spider-Man. It looked cool now, with a TV and a gaming console set up, ready on one sofa, and then a shelf of books in case that was more up people's street. The room was constantly emitting a calming music set up for a speaker that Friday had control of. The lava lamp on the cabinet gave the room a sort of endearing quality, next to the fishbowl with several varieties of pretty fish that Emily had promised to take care of. He'd already named one that was red and gold after Tony. Peter's favorite part of the whole room was probably the beanbag corner, which was a simple corner full of beanbags in varying colors. Peter was thinking back on his 2 days as boss when an Iron Man suit came flying out of the sky and landed on the roof. Peter knew better than to suspect that Tony wasn't in it, and as he suspected, the repulsors powered off, and Tony stepped out of the suit, looking extremely ill and rough still. Pepper had lifted the bed rest before she'd gotten on the plane, but Tony was under strict instructions not to do anything reckless, like, say, flying one of his suits. "You shouldn't be here," Peter warned him, his heart racing. If Tony wanted to contact him, he could have called. Peter probably would have picked up, even though he was planning on avoiding Tony. "Pepper will kill you." Tony skipped over the subject, immediately launching into a dramatic, "You didn't come to see me the other day," Tony sniffed, pretending to be hurt. "Probably." Peter could rarely get a tell on his emotions. The man so often launched into sarcasm that it was difficult to distinguish from anything else. "I know, I'm sorry. I was tired." It was the truth, but he had evaded a visit to Tony in favor of, well, going out as Spider-Man. "You then went on to uncover an entire family who were in the mob and helped them get arrested, Peter. I read the news. You weren't tired. You were avoiding me." "Okay, fine. I was avoiding you." True, he was avoiding Tony. He didn't particularly want to speak about his 2 days as the CEO, because by the end of it he'd truly kind of forgotten that he was only a CEO temporarily, and that all of the new projects he'd opened and started, he wouldn't be in charge of when Pepper finally flew back from Japan, and that made him sad. He wanted to make sure the comfort room was perfect, not just mostly done, and the lawsuit all went through in the end, and continued to make decisions about what was best for Stark Industries. He enjoyed his time as CEO. Something he'd never thought he would say. As interim director, most of the things he had arranged and done as CEO would not be accepted to continue doing, and that sucked. Big time. So yes, he'd been avoiding Tony. Peter had overstepped the mark in so many areas, and he didn't really want to be punished for it. "You should have told me, Pete." There were simply so many things he could apply to that, and he didn't know how much Tony knew, so there was only one thing for it. Peter stood up from his position on the roof to apologize. "I'm sorry, was it the lawsuit? I know we only arranged it in 2 days, but I thought all of the clauses were solid. I got Mr. Murdoch to have a look at it all as well, and he said it seemed sound, or maybe the robot. You don't like the suggestions I gave Isaac, do you? You don't actually have to implement them, by the way. He knows what he was doing. He'd only said he would because I was in charge, but you can tell him I was joking about calling them that." "Peter." Tony went to stop him, but he felt the need to carry on. Shit. He'd done so many things in the 2 days without getting permission from either Pepper or Tony. Shit. They were going to fire him as interim director. Oh shoot, it was the comfort room, right? I know. I should have gotten permission before redecorating the whole room and literally knocking a wall through it and hiring an employee, but I spoke to this employee called Mary, and she was like, wise, and said it was a cool idea, and I thought it was too, and so I just did it, so then Pepper wouldn't have to listen to me rambling, because making a comfort room isn't really an interim director's job, but I wanted to do it. And also, if Pepper thinks the intern's affair isn't a thing we should do, then that's fine. But I did get one of the employees in the Human Resources Department to sort of start planning it with my permission, so she will have to sort that out. Sorry. Peter was speaking at the speed of light, and he thought he'd probably covered everything he'd done that was out of line, but Tony was just staring at him wide-eyed. "Pete," Tony said slowly, "I was here to talk to you about the woman who tried to kill you on Wednesday." "Oh." Peter looked at the floor. He kicked some gravel with his trainers. He just told all of that to Mr. Stark for no reason? Now he really was going to get told off. "Yeah, that happened." "Kid, you should have told me." Tony looked visibly upset when Peter glanced up from the floor. And Peter should have told Tony, of course he should have. But he was trying to be independent and resilient and fix problems without getting help, and he didn't want to worry Tony. "Did Happy tell you?" Peter asked. "No, not Happy. Although he and I will be having words about why he didn't think to inform me of a seriously high security concern when my kid was in charge and almost got killed by some nutter journalist woman. Head of security, Jesus." Peter blinked at the "my kid," mentally storing that away for later when he could even think about digesting that. His heart skipped a beat when Tony said that, "my kid." But Peter is quick to defend Happy. No, don't punish him. It was me. I asked him not to tell you. I said that I was going to tell you. Oh, that stumped Tony. And technically, he couldn't dispute that, because you were his boss. Well, that's a fairly smart, kid, although I am a little upset you didn't want me to know. I kind of guilt-tripped in not telling you because you were ill. You are ill. Peter gestured to Tony. I can't believe you didn't say anything. Tony shook his head in disbelief. We spoke just after it happened. I wanted to sort it out before you heard about it. They were planning to publish an article that would really hurt your reputation, Tony. Something about me being your secret kid and you being a shit dad because you left me all alone for most of my life, Peter explained. Tony paused, digesting the statement before continuing. Well, that hits quite deep for the bucket of personal trauma, and it would have stung if I'd read it. Probably would have been fairly accurate. Peter frowned. Tony shouldn't think of himself as a bad dad. He was literally being a good dad by being here, reprimanding him for lying. And Tony wasn't even Peter's dad. He had big dad energy. But if you think I care about the article, kid, you're far off base. I care far more about this woman almost killing you. Peter rolled his eyes. It's a gun, Mr. Stark. You and I both know I've dealt with a lot more than a stray gun as Spider-Man. Doing it as Peter Parker isn't that different. Why didn't you say anything? Tony clearly couldn't quite believe it, that Peter had almost been killed and then had decided not to encroach upon the topic, with his mentor who was ill in the hospital. Well, I didn't want to worry you, but also... Peter grimaced. I didn't want to repeat of the stabbing incident. Tony had gone overboard then. Anything was necessary to avoid that happening again, even avoiding the truth. Hey, underoos, I had a perfectly normal reaction to that. Peter raised his eyebrows. You get stabbed, I up your protocols, that's normal. Peter decided to be blatantly open with his mentor. You're a helicopter parent, Mr. Stark, and you would have broken out of the hospital just to come and see me, even though it would have been completely unnecessary. Unnecessary? Tony exploded with disbelief. You almost got shot in the head. Well, I should have called you after it happened, I agree with that. But you would have overreacted, so I'm glad I didn't. She's in custody now anyway, and there's a lawsuit in the way. Yeah, kid, about that. Tony started shaking his head in amazement, a complete switch in emotions. I leave you alone for 2 days, and you start becoming a lawyer? What's that about? You realize Pepper could have done that. There was no need to stress yourself about doing that. It was my mess, I needed to clean it up. Peter waved Tony's concerns away. Anyways, I didn't get much of the rest of your speech, Tony tried to remember, scrunching his eyes closed in the process. Something about robots, something about a therapist. It was fairly garbled, and I was trying to get a word in edgewise, but well... Sorry, that's my bad. Peter smiled just a little. The reprimanding was over. It's okay. Want to explain your couple of days to me? And Peter launched into an explanation of his tour at Stark Industries. He didn't let Tony interrupt very much, running by the information as quickly as he could, still keeping a decent amount of detail. He'd imagined he'd have to do the same thing to Pepper when her flight landed. By the time he finished, Tony had his eyebrows raised. So let me get this straight. Not only did you do a whole sweep of the entire New York branch, you also spoke to a member of the London team, found a corrupt employee who had been leaking news from his side to the media, who turned out to be an undercover journalist, was also working on a separate story for the same newspaper determined to bring me down. Tony made it sound completely incredulous, but honestly, Peter thought it was fairly normal. You also created a full lawsuit into their wider company. It also got the employee arrested for trying to kill you, somehow managed to solve everyone's grievances, meet everyone, and hire a therapist for a new room which was fully constructed and decorated. Tony shook his head. In 2 days. You also spent the evening as Spider-Man, and in the process of doing so took down a whole crime family. And you're worried that you failed? That you haven't lived up to my expectations? Tony shook his head. Pete, kid, you've gone above and beyond. Beyond that, even. You're gone to Mars, Peter. You've done that in the last 2 days that Pepper and I hadn't even thought of. The comfort room of yours, directly hiring a therapist who was out of work that you heard from Sam was trustworthy. Genius, kid. And I'm not talking about science. Yeah. Tony started to nod repeatedly. Peter? Yeah? Peter said, beaming. The praise he just got, the genuine admiration, the love that Tony radiated whenever he spoke was beyond any compliment he'd ever received. Yeah, Peter would call Tony his dad without any hesitation. He thought back to Tony's reaction to the article content. Probably accurate. Tony thought he'd be a bad dad, because of Howard Stark. Peter wanted more than anything to tell Tony that it wasn't the case, that Tony was so nurturing, so kind, such a good father figure, that Tony could call Peter his kid, and Peter would be fine with that, but it wasn't the time. Tony was buzzing just as much as him. I've got a confession, the real truth now. Tony waved a hand up into the air. I think you're finally ready to hear it. Peter ran through the possibilities in his mind. What could Tony be telling him? That he and Pepper were finally going to get married, or something to do with the Avengers. Oh my god, was he going to be made an official member of the Avengers? It had been a test last time. But this time, maybe he was ready to tackle being part of the team. He'd remain a frosty distance from Captain America, of course. After the whole Tony-Steve debacle, Peter was loyal to Tony, even if he did have just a couple of questions about the shield and Bucky's mental arm. But Peter was rambling, and he missed the first part of what Tony was saying and his ideas about the confession. So, Pepper and I had talked a while ago about the future. Tony paused, and then continued. Our future, and the future of the company, and we've decided that, well, if you're comfortable with it, you're going to be the future of the company. Peter's brain stopped working. He couldn't function. There were no words. What do you mean by that? Peter asked breathlessly. Well, you'll be the CEO of Stark Industries when Pepper decides to step down. Putting it bluntly, Peter, you're my heir. Tony revealed, a small smile on his face as he looked at Peter. Peter looked at Tony, eyes raised very highly, and mouth gaping open. He was mute. He couldn't even move. He just stared at Tony, then looked down at the floor. Standing on top of the building apparently wasn't a good place for a confession like that, because Peter felt like there was no air. It was too much, too big to comprehend. Peter? Tony checked. You good? Peter looked back at Tony and promptly fainted. Alright guys, and that was the end of chapter 3 of the Heir to Stark Industries by Only Forward. I hope you guys like this chapter, and I'll see you next one.